The year was 1967. While America's youth filled the streets with protest signs and flower crowns, behind the closed doors of Chevrolet's secret skunk works, a very different kind of revolution was taking shape. Hidden from corporate eyes, a handful of rogue engineers were crafting something extraordinary. A compact, high-revving, race-bred beast that would forever alter the course of American motorsport. They weren't just building an engine, they were igniting a rebellion on four wheels. GM executives would later bury its legacy, but the legend refused to die. This is the untold story of the Chevy 302, the outlaw motor that defied corporate giants, ruled racetracks, and disappeared into myth. The truth may set you free, but first, it's going to piss you off. It was 5 liters of pure defiance, a mechanical middle finger to the corporate rulebook. Crammed into an impossibly small package, the 302 wasn't designed for comfort or compliance. It was engineered for domination. This wasn't an engine. It was a weapon. A fusion of industrial espionage, raw ingenuity, and mechanical genius packed into a cast-iron block that howled to 7,000 RPM when everything else was gasping at 5,500. Late 1960s weren't just about peace and love. In Detroit, it was war. Ford, Chrysler, and GM were locked in a brutal horsepower battle with no rules and one goal: absolute supremacy. But the real battleground wasn't the street. It was the Trans-Am racing series, where engines couldn't exceed 305 cubic inches. Ford already had their 302, but Chevy's smallest V8 was the 327. That wasn't going to cut it. Something had to change, and fast. What followed was an operation cloaked in secrecy and whispers. Enter Vince Piggins, Chevrolet's performance mastermind, leading a daring project alongside camshaft wizard Dick Kenneth and Corvette legend Zora Arkus-Duntov. They didn't wait for permission. As Piggins would later admit, we built it to win. In the shadows of GM's Tonawanda plant in New York, the team pieced together a new power plant using parts from the 327 and 283 engines. Their work had to remain underground. GM's internal ban on high-performance engines under 5.0 liters forced them to label prototypes as experimental, sneaking their creation past corporate watchdogs. This wasn't just engineering. It was mechanical rebellion. By merging the 4-inch bore from the 327 with the short 3-inch stroke from the 283, they created the perfect storm, a 302 cubic inch engine that slid just under Trans-Am rules. The result was a high-revving masterpiece that would become the beating heart of the legendary Z28 Camaro. For 3 short years, 1967, 1968, and 1969, the 302 lived officially, yet secretly. It represented everything the corporate world feared: performance for passion's sake, not profit. The 302 wasn't built to sell cars. It was built to win races. Its specs read like something out of a top-secret military file. That ideal 4-3-inch combination delivering an astounding 1.33.1 bore-to-stroke ratio, practically unheard of in Detroit at the time. While other V8s wheezed out at 5,500 RPM, the 302 came alive past that point, screaming toward 7,000 RPM and beyond. This was no ordinary small block. It was a symbol of rebellion, brilliance, and danger, a power plant that made the mighty bow tie roar like never before. But the truth behind its creation was something GM never wanted you to know. And trust me, what comes next will shock you even more. They said it was only 290 horsepower, but the truth? It was far more sinister than that. Beneath that factory rating, the Chevy 302 was hiding something wild, something dangerous. Insiders whispered about real numbers closer to 350, even 375 horsepower, lurking inside those iron blocks, just waiting for the right driver to unleash it. Every inch of that engine was built for war. Forged steel crankshafts, bulletproof pistons, solid lifter camshafts with a savage 485-inch lift, and an 11.1 compression ratio that dared the brave to push harder. The Holley R453 carburetor didn't feed fuel. It delivered it with the precision of a sniper's rifle. And that exhaust note? It wasn't just noise. It was a declaration, a battle cry from deep within Detroit's dark heart. The I-302 wasn't just a motor. It was mechanical anarchy wrapped in cast iron. Mechanics nicknamed it the Deuce for its 302 cubic inch displacement and the Screaming Mouse for the way it shrieked at full song. But here's where things get truly wild. Its aluminum intake manifold wasn't designed in Detroit. It was reverse-engineered from a Ford GT40 part confiscated from Le Mans. Yes, Chevy's rebel engineers literally stole Ford's ideas and made them better. In secret tests, they dropped the 302 into a Nova and unleashed it on drag strips under the cover of night, humiliating Ford's mighty Fairlane 427 in plain sight. Drivers described the 302 like a living creature, unpredictable, furious, and addictive. Racer Mark Donohue called it a time bomb, grinning as he said, "And I loved lighting the fuse." Jerry Titus confessed that it pulled at 7,000 RPM like it wanted to tear itself apart. But here's what no one outside Chevy's inner circle knew. The engine's every component was deliberately overbuilt, as if its creators knew this beast would be pushed far past its limits. Coincidence? Not a chance. The truth is darker. That so-called production aluminum intake had enlarged runners and a plenum design that came straight from Chevy's top-secret racing lab. The double hump heads, with 2.02-inch intake valves, weren't just off-the-shelf parts. They were evolved from prototypes tested at Daytona and Sebring. Even the connecting rods were identical to those in the 427 L88 race engines, heat-treated, shot-peened, and magnaflux to endure impossible forces. Engineers even added hidden oil passages and strengthened bearing surfaces, upgrades that wouldn't appear in normal engines for years. This wasn't a street motor. It was a pure-blooded racing prototype disguised as a production option, a wolf in Chevy clothing. And when it hit the track, the world saw what corporate America tried to hide. The Trans-Am wars had begun. The clash between Ford's Boss 302 and Chevy's fire-breathing 302 reached its boiling point at Riverside in 1968. When Mark Donohue's Z28 snatched victory from Parnelli Jones's Mustang on the final lap. "They said we cheated," Roger Penske laughed later. "We just out-engineered them." That race wasn't just a win, it was a statement. The 302 had proven itself as Detroit's deadliest small block, but success came at a cost. GM's top brass, nervous about the spotlight and hungry for mass-market sales, began to suffocate their own creation. Mid-season, production of the Z28 was slashed, redirected toward the safer, more profitable Camaro SS. The legend of the 302 was being erased from within, but the beast they built refused to die. And what happened next was even more explosive. Why did Chevrolet pull the plug on the 302 after only 3 short years? The official explanation paints a polite picture: changing emissions standards, market shifts, and evolving buyer interests. But anyone who's dug into the truth knows better. The 302 wasn't retired because it failed. It was executed because it succeeded too well. The engine had committed the ultimate corporate crime. It was too powerful, too capable, and too efficient for its own good. Think about it. The 302's performance was embarrassing GM's own big block lineup, the engines they sold as the ultimate symbols of power. Why would anyone pay a premium for a heavy 396 when a finely tuned 302 could match it on the track, handle better, and weigh far less? It wasn't just outperforming expectations, it was outsmarting GM's business model. Internal documents buried deep in the archives reportedly reveal growing panic among executives about what they called the Z28 problem. Their solution was as ruthless as it was deliberate. Restrict production, cut marketing, and eventually kill the engine altogether. By 1970, the 302 was officially gone, replaced by softer, emissions-friendly options that wouldn't threaten GM's hierarchy or profits. The enthusiasts who begged for limited racing versions were met with corporate silence. The message from Detroit's boardrooms was unmistakable. The revolution will not be horsepower rated, and the betrayal went deeper still. A leaked 1969 memo spelled it out in plain words. The Z28 threatens Corvette sales. Terminate the 302. The performance division had created something too dangerous to control, but the engineers weren't ready to let it die. Quietly, they smuggled blueprints to private builders and racers, ensuring the 302's heartbeat lived on, roaring through underground drag strips long after GM declared it extinct. The irony? Its DNA never really disappeared. That legendary 1.33.1 bore-to-stroke ratio, the secret behind its ferocious high RPM power, later appeared in the LS7, and even today's LS engines trace their roots back to the 302's mechanical rebellion. One Chevy engineer once confessed, "Every LS engine owes a debt to the 302's defiance." The truth is chilling. The 302 knew too much. could do too much and had to be buried before it changed everything forever. Because sometimes, the loudest engines are the ones corporate America tries hardest to silence. The true measure of the Chevy 302's greatness wasn't printed in spec sheets or corporate brochures. It was carved into asphalt and written in burnt rubber across America's racetracks. In 1968 and 1969, the Camaro Z28 didn't just enter the Trans-Am series, it owned it. Under the command of legendary driver Mark Donohue and Roger Penske's Sunoco Blue Z28, this once clandestine engine project turned into a motorsport dynasty. The results spoke louder than any executive press release ever could. 10 victories in the 1969 season alone. The Chevy 302 didn't just win, it demoralized the competition. Pit crews from Ford, Dodge, and AMC could only stare in disbelief as this small block warrior screamed past 7,000 RPM lap after lap, while their engines sputtered, overheated, or begged for rebuilds. Properly tuned, the 302 was nearly indestructible, a weapon built to outlast and outfight anything on the grid. What made these triumphs even more astonishing was the caliber of the opposition. This wasn't a walkover against outdated machines. This was Chevy going toe-to-toe with the best America had to offer. Ford's Boss 302, Dodge's potent 340, and AMC's top-tier challengers. And yet, time after time, they all fell to the relentless fury of the screaming mouse. But the 302 wasn't just a road racer's dream. It proved its versatility across drag strips, hill climbs, and even endurance events. A multi-talented powerhouse that rewarded any driver brave enough to tame its razor-sharp power band. This was no one-trick pony. It was an all-conquering thoroughbred born from rebellion and precision. Today, the Chevy 302 stands for more than raw horsepower. It embodies the forbidden fruit of American performance, a symbol of mechanical defiance now worshipped by collectors. Authentic numbers-matching 302 engines have become sacred relics, fetching eye-watering prices. Complete Z28s now command between $150,000 and $250,000 at auction, with ultra-rare Copo and special order variants reaching into the stratosphere. Why the obsession? Sure, rarity plays its part. Only around 20,000 true Z28s ever rolled off the line, but it's what they represent that drives collectors mad. The last unfiltered burst of pure performance before emissions rules and corporate caution strangled the soul out of Detroit's golden age. Every casting number, every stamped date code, every bit of iron tells a story. One of rebellion, innovation, and a fight against conformity. The Chevy 302 wasn't just an engine. It was a revolution that refused to die. And the irony? The very motor GM tried to bury has become the crown jewel of its legacy, the legend they never wanted you to remember. What GM once tried to erase has ironically become one of its most treasured creations. The very engine Chevrolet buried in secrecy is now a holy relic among collectors and performance purists. Original 302 parts, those solid lifter camshafts, forged steel crankshafts, and precision-calibrated carburetors, now command prices that would leave the original engineers speechless. A complete new old stock 302 intake manifold can fetch as much as $5,000, and that's just the beginning. An entire industry has emerged solely to verify authenticity, with experts employing metallurgical testing, microscopic casting mark analysis, and archival documentation to distinguish genuine 302 components from clever reproductions. In the shadowy world of high-end muscle car collecting, the DNA of the Chevy 302 is examined with more scrutiny than evidence in a courtroom. Though officially gone for over half a century, the spirit of the 302 still pulses through modern performance engines like a mechanical ghost, its fingerprints visible everywhere you look. Today's LS Series small blocks, with their over-square design and sky-high rev limits, carry the unmistakable genetic code of the 302. When GM's engineers developed the LS7 for the Corvette 06, 7,000 RPM monster in a production car, they weren't inventing something new. They were summoning the ghost of the 302. Its influence even stretches beyond Chevrolet's borders. Ford's Coyote V8s, Dodge's modern Hemis, all borrow from the same philosophy that the 302 perfected. Lightweight internals, optimal bore-to-stroke balance, and high-flow cylinder heads designed for sustained, screaming performance. But the 302's greatest legacy isn't just technical, it's cultural. It redefined what enthusiasts demand from an engine. something that delivers far more than the brochure ever promises. The same strategy of underrating horsepower, now a norm among manufacturers, was pioneered by the 302 decades ago. And while corporations moved on, underground racers didn't forget. Across garages and race shops today, modern builders still assemble 302-inspired engines using contemporary technology, not as replicas, but as spiritual successors. They're keeping alive the soul of an era when engines were built from passion, not policy, and when performance wasn't measured by rules but by rebellion. Because the truth is, the Chevy 302 never really died. It just evolved, hiding in plain sight under new badges, new names, and new generations, still whispering the same defiant message it roared all those years ago. The Chevrolet 302 V8 wasn't just another engine. It was a rebellion cast in aluminum and steel. It proved what could happen when pure engineering genius broke free from corporate control. For 3 short but unforgettable years, it showed the world what performance could look like when passion outweighed profit and creativity outran caution. Even today, the roar of an original 302 can still be heard on vintage racetracks and at car shows across the country, commanding respect from anyone who knows what they're witnessing. Each surviving engine carries a haunting question that echoes through history. What if? What if GM had pushed its development further? What if emissions laws hadn't changed the playing field? What if the corporate suits had embraced its potential instead of fearing its power? The real story of the 302 was never told in glossy brochures or scripted advertisements. It was written in tire smoke, victory laps, and the satisfied grins of Z28 drivers leaving bigger engines in the dust. It lived in the whispered pride of engineers who knew they'd created something that transcended the boundaries of corporate politics and became pure legend. And when Chevy experimented with canted valve heads for the DZ302, inspired by lessons from the mighty Mark V big block, it was nothing short of Trans-Am brilliance. The result was breathtaking: improved airflow, better combustion, and a staggering 450 horsepower squeezed from a small block in 1968. Pair that with a cross-ram intake, and you had an engine built to scream at the red line, a masterpiece that was tragically too wild for production. Imagine that canted valve 302, roaring straight off the showroom floor, inside a Z28. It could have rewritten the entire muscle car era, standing toe-to-toe with Ford's Boss 302 and changing history itself. But instead, GM silenced it, and in doing so, created one of the greatest what-ifs in American automotive history. The 302's ghost still lingers over Detroit, whispering to every engineer and racer who dares to dream beyond the rulebook. So, was it the greatest engine GM ever killed? Or the beginning of something even greater? Because one thing's for sure, legends never really die. They just wait to be rediscovered.